The Midlands. Now the news at 10 o'clock with Michael Burke and Michael Colley.
The Prime Minister's wife and the con man. He did do deals for her. Cherie Blair says it's her fault that Downing Street continually denied it. Journey's end. The Sangatte asylum seekers reach Britain at last. The television presenter John Leslie has been arrested on accusation of rape. And the Navy's Top Gun has been killed in a Harrier crash.
Here in the Midlands tonight, 6 years for the teenager found guilty of killing a care worker in a fire. And the Vale of Tears, football's cash crisis bites in the Potteries.
Good evening. After days of official denials by 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's wife, Cherie Blair, was forced to admit today that she used a convicted conman to buy 2 flats in Bristol. She says she was not aware of Peter Foster's criminal record when he claimed to have negotiated substantial discounts for her on the price of both flats. Mrs. Blair has apologised for what she described as a misunderstanding. From Westminster, our political editor Andrew Marr.
A face in the crowd, a West Country man of property. Yes, it's Tony Blair, on his way to Bristol this evening, where his family now owns flats bought with the help of a convicted criminal.
Prime Minister, good afternoon, sir. Do you regret your wife getting involved with Mr. Foster?
Behind that fixed smile, you bet he does. Taken for a ride, all the way to the front pages. This odd tale starts in Bristol. 2 new apartments, one of them for Ewan, the Blair's eldest son, who's at university here, were bought by Mrs. Blair for £52,000 below the asking price, partly thanks to this man, Peter Foster, himself forced to face the press today. He's the partner of Mrs. Blair's close friend, Carol Kaplan. The Prime Minister's wife called him a star. He told her, "Your pleasure is my purpose." The trouble is, he's got a record of fraud, jailed in 3 continents. An odd acquaintance for Mrs. Blair, lawyer and judge.
It is a past I naturally regret, but as everybody who knows me is fully aware, I have paid for my dues and I've moved on, having learned from those past mistakes. As far as my recent dealings over the past few months are concerned, and my correspondence with Cherie Blair, I've always viewed them as confidential. They will remain confidential, and I will never comment.
So why does this matter? First, because at press briefings this week, Downing Street misled the media about Foster's involvement. Denying really damaging stories, it also said he hadn't negotiated the flat sales for her. This morning, the Daily Mail published emails between Foster and Mrs. Blair showing that was not true. With government press officers under attack for lying, Cherie Blair apologised and issued a statement saying she and she alone is responsible for any misunderstanding between the number 10 press office and the media. Her main preoccupation was to rebut unfounded allegations while also seeking to draw reasonable lines around her private affairs. No crime has been committed. Mr. Foster and Mrs. Blair have met only once in person, but his record is pretty dreadful, going right back to a slimming con trick investigated by That's Life in the 1980s.
I always thought that Peter Foster was the nastiest con man that we ever exposed. He was a repeat offender. It seemed to me he had no compunction. He was completely callous.
So, not the ideal go-between in a lucrative property deal then. Today, Cherie Blair was keeping her head down, as she has mostly done for the past 5 years, neatly avoiding controversy while following her own career and guarding her family. Arriving in Bristol tonight with plenty of other problems to chew on, Tony Blair has unwittingly given his enemies a bit more ammunition. When you're at the top, the personal is always political.
And Andrew Marr's in Downing Street now. An extraordinary situation for number 10 there to be in, to deny so consistently something that turns out to be true. How exactly did it happen?
Well, I don't think I'm breaking a major international scoop when I say that Mrs. Blair doesn't much like the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail doesn't much like Mrs. Blair. So when the Downing Street press officers were confronted with a whole range of stories about her relationship with this man, she gave a very, very terse response, so short in its denial and detail that the press officers then misled the media and therefore everybody else. They knew nothing about this great torrent of emails until they picked up their papers this morning. So there's been a bit of frost about that. Result, only that Cherie Blair, who, as I say, has had a pretty good record as a Prime Minister's consort over the last 5 years in keeping out of trouble, finds herself right in the spotlight. She's not going to enjoy tomorrow morning's papers one little bit, where the general consensus, I think, is that she's got some pretty funny friends.
It's not easy being a Prime Minister's consort, as you put it, particularly when you have the personality and interests of somebody like Cherie Blair.
That's right. I mean, she is somebody who has strong political views of her own, who has been pursuing a very vigorous career in the legal profession, and who is obviously a very active and engaged mother, and has to do all this while appearing completely silently, those famous lips always zipped alongside Tony Blair. It is very, very difficult, and as she's learned tonight in the worst possible way, you have to be very, very careful about your friends as well.
Andrew, thanks. The first immigrants to be given work permits in the UK as part of the deal to close the Sangatte refugee centre have arrived in Britain. The group, most of them Iraqi Kurds, are the first of 1,200 people who will be let in before the French camp closes. Margaret Gilmore reports on their first day in Britain.
Before dawn on a day most here never dreamed of. No more sneaking under lorries or breaking through barbed wire in a mad dash for the tunnel. 39 Iraqis were being coached across, courtesy of the UK Home Office. First stop a holding centre near Calais, where they were photographed, fingerprinted and given 4-year work visas by British immigration staff.
We've got a very well-structured plan in place to provide them with the employment opportunities. Most of these people have got no experience of Britain, so we're actually making the arrangements for them to pursue that.
Then the brief journey through the Channel Tunnel and on to London, and a 3-month support package where they'll get English tuition, help to find work and temporary accommodation in the heart of the West End. These are young men, skilled, keen for more education, from families wealthy enough to pay smugglers £5,000 each to bring them by lorry overland from Iraq. Ahmed Al-Hashim, a 30-year-old mechanical engineer, says he's ready to start work tomorrow.
I feel very happy, and all the people feel very happy now. Big happy, top happy.
And how is everybody inside?
It's very relaxed and quiet and happy, don't worry.
But Iraqi Kurds who've been here a while and came the hard way in the back of a lorry celebrating a wedding in North London tonight say when today's new arrivals lose their support after 3 months, they could still find it difficult to get work and will worry that their visas are limited.
The language is difficult, and the culture, and you have to be always worried about what's going to happen after 4 years.
It's been a controversial arrival for today's immigrants. Opposition MPs suggest work permit laws may have been breached, and tonight refugee groups say they should have been allowed to claim asylum. Making them economic migrants is confusing.
It blurs the distinction between the international obligation civilized nations have to offer protection to those fleeing from persecution and the economic needs of the country, which is all about the immigration policy on labour migration.
This morning in October, following a series of newspaper claims about his private life. He denies the allegations.
John Leslie spent most of the day at this central London police station. The 37-year-old TV presenter, seen here at a charity event, had agreed to speak to detectives. On arrival, he was formally arrested before questioning began.
We understand that he's been questioned over 3 very specific allegations. Firstly, that he raped a woman in southwest London in 1998. Secondly, that he committed an indecent assault on a second woman in 1997. And that he committed a further indecent assault on a third individual in London last year.
Today's development follows ITV's decision to sack Leslie from his role presenting the daytime show this morning. His employer said his failure to respond to recent allegations about his private life had made his position untenable. But John Leslie's lawyers said today's interview provided the first opportunity to hear those allegations in detail, their statement adding, he strenuously denies all these allegations and intends to continue to do so, but he will now assist the police with their inquiries.
When was the last time this had a wash,
John Leslie first gained public attention as a presenter of the BBC's Blue Peter. By the time the team reunited for this royal visit, he'd branched out into other presenting roles. Media interest in him sharpened after TV personality Ulrika Johnson claimed in her autobiography that she had been raped. She never named the person responsible. Tonight, John Leslie was allowed to leave on bail. He'll return for further questioning in January. Robert Hall, BBC News, Central London.
Saddam Hussein says he's let the United Nations weapons inspectors back into Iraq to give them a chance to disprove American claims that he has weapons of mass destruction. Speaking publicly for the first time since the inspections resumed, he told Iraqis to be patient in the face of what he called arrogant US despotism.
It is Eid, the most important Muslim holiday of the year, and to mark it, Saddam Hussein has been seen on Iraqi television greeting his senior officials. He said he had agreed to the UN weapons inspections here to keep his people out of harm's way. But whatever happens, he said, victory will be Iraq's. Saddam's government says it is now preparing for war. Not only the troops here have got guns, civilians have been issued with weapons as well, according to Iraq's Deputy Prime Minister.
We are the only country in the world, the only government in the world who gives weapons to its people in hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And that's because we are sure of the attitude of our people. You can find a gun in every house in Iraq, and all these guns will be used against any invasion of Iraq, not against the leadership and the government of Iraq.
Today, though, only smiles and laughter in Baghdad, families celebrating Eid with the traditional day out at the fun fair, enjoying peace while they can, knowing that war could be just months or even weeks away. Iraq says it will take a miracle to stop one. The Americans say it is Saddam's choice. This weekend is crunch time. It's when Iraq presents to the UN its long-awaited weapons declaration. Will it be good enough for President Bush and Tony Blair? Well, almost certainly not, because it will be several thousand pages long, but it won't contain a single admission of a single weapon of mass destruction. The clouds of war are gathering. Ben Brown, BBC News, Baghdad.
A woman who stabbed her abusive husband to death has had her murder conviction overturned. Donna Tinker was jailed for life 2 years ago for murdering her husband Richard. Today, the Court of Appeal reduced her conviction to manslaughter. More than 600 birds covered in oil have been washed up on the East Anglian coast. The source of the oil hasn't been identified, but it's thought to be leaking from an undersea wreck. The Royal Navy is mourning the loss of its top Sea Harrier pilot, who was killed today when his plane crashed on takeoff from RAF Wittering in Cambridgeshire. A second crew member escaped with minor injuries. Lieutenant Commander Martin London, who was 43, had recently received the Queen's Commendation for bravery in the air. George Eakin reports.
Lieutenant Commander Jack London, as he was known throughout the Royal Navy, was a legend, the most experienced and distinguished of the Navy's pilots. A charismatic veteran of 24 years' service, he made no secret he'd always rather pilot his Sea Harrier than seek promotion and fly a desk. Jack London died when his two-seater training version of the Sea Harrier crashed on takeoff at RAF Wittering. The pilot flying with him survived with minor injuries. Training with his squadron for possible war with Iraq would have been routine for Jack London, who had already served in the Gulf, in former Yugoslavia and in Sierra Leone. He was a qualified instructor in helicopters as well as the fast jets, which were his passion.
The job is absolutely brilliant. You know, it's the best thing I can think of ever doing. It's just the lure of flying, really. It was just so exciting.
Jack London was decorated for bravery in the air, and just last week television viewers saw why. high over the Gulf, his cockpit roof shattered. He'd have been excused ditching it, but instead managed to land the stricken Sea Harrier on HMS Invincible. Today, colleagues paid tribute to him.
Great pilot, great friend to a whole bunch of other people. He's been an instructor, he's taken countless numbers of pilots through their training. And even when you come back from the front line, he'll be in the back checking you out. And it's just a particularly sad day for us, I'm afraid.
A board of inquiry's been set up to find out what caused the crash that killed the Navy's top pilot. George Eakin, BBC News.
The stricken oil tanker Prestige is still leaking oil 3 weeks after it started to break up off the coast of Spain. New pictures of the submerged tanker taken by a French submarine show heavy fuel oil still coming out. It's raised fears that the disaster could have a long-term effect on the environment and fishing in the area. The European Union has recommended that single-hulled old vessels like the Prestige be banned from European waters. The first talks for 10 years have begun between the exiled spiritual leader of has told the BBC he's hopeful that these contacts could eventually make his return from exile possible. The Chinese Communist
by 50 years of Chinese rule.